on Sky News Australia. This is the Rita Panahi Show.
Good evening and welcome to the Rita Panahi Show. Coming up tonight, Dick Smith versus the ABC. Why is the RMIT ABC fact-checking unit copping criticism far and wide, including from the world's richest man, Elon Musk? And we're very excited indeed to bring you our interview with the great Douglas Murray. He's been in the country and he has some sobering advice for the self-loathers among us.
When you're dealing with the majority of your population being made to feel less than, I mean, as I say, that's an experiment no one has really tried before.
No.
People have tried to oppress minorities, but trying to oppress and beleaguer and demoralise the majority in a country, I mean, that's lunacy.
That's coming up shortly. Let's bring in media writer for The Australian now, Sophie Ellsworth. Sophie, we'll get into the Dick Smith v ABC craziness. I love that story. That's gone global. We've got Elon Musk weighing in on it. But I want to start with the US, where the Democratic strategist James Carville has said that one reason why President Biden's popularity is plummeting in many polls is that the Democrats have a women problem, in that there are too many of them having too much of a say. In an interview with the New York Times, he said, "A suspicion of mine is that there are too many preachy females. Don't drink beer, don't watch football, don't eat hamburgers. This is not good for you. The message is too feminine. Everything you're doing is destroying the planet. You've got to eat your peas." Oh, Sophie, James Carville is a darling of the left, but these comments are controversial.
Oh, they are, Rita, and no one wants preachy females who say, I don't do this, I don't do that, and we should do this and should do that. So I actually think he makes a pretty good point there, and it's really important coming up to the election that we don't have all these preachy females that are telling us how to live our lives. So I think there's some pretty valid points there, Rita.
Now, Facebook's parent company Meta will now be recommending less political content on your Instagram feed and Threads. If you're on Threads, I don't know anyone who is. They've changed the algorithms as we head into the US election. So if the suggestion is that this is going to be applied evenly across the board, but we know how left-leaning Meta can be. We saw Facebook ban the New York Post Hunter Biden laptop story before the 2020 election, and Mark Zuckerberg, well, he personally donated around $400 million to help fortify the election. So there is suspicion out there among the Republicans that this is an effort to influence the election.
Well, Rachel, I think this is very concerning heading into the election. We should be able to see everything and then curate it how we want, flick past things if we don't want to engage with particular political views. But the fact that this is on the radar now, I think, and call me sceptical, but I think this is a problem. I don't think we're going to see fair and balanced political coverage on social media platforms coming up to the US presidential election.
Now, Sophie, you along with Jack Horton have been causing a bit of trouble because your stories have gone viral. They're being shared by the likes of Michael Schellenberger. I saw Elon Musk comment on one of your stories. This is all about the RMIT ABC fact-checking unit and their war with Dick Smith, this leftist activist operation masquerading as a fact-checking unit, may have got itself into a bit of trouble with Dick Smith because he's going to take them to task, it seems, for suggesting that what he said was false when it appears to be quite accurate.
Well, that's right, Rita. They've put together this extensive fact-checking, dossier that says, can a country run entirely on renewable energy? And in it, it makes claims that, for example, that he's not pro-renewable energy. Now, I've spoken to Dick Smith, and he has refuted numerous claims in here, including claims that California can run entirely on wind and solar. He's explained that they also have nuclear energy over there. So they're neglecting different parts of the puzzle here. So basically, in a nutshell, Dick Smith is saying this document is wrong and he wants it corrected on the record because it's tarnishing his reputation. He says it's full of lies. He's in the process of writing to the ABC and he says if it's not amended, he will be taking legal action.
That is an escalation if I ever heard one. But he is right. You can't just run on wind and solar. You need some sort of baseload power. You need, at the very least, hydro. And what large-scale economy around the world is running entirely on wind and solar? I mean, for them to suggest that what he said is false, it's dishonest. And it just shows how these fact-checking units are really operating as leftist activist machines to try to convince people. When you call yourself a fact checker, then you've got to be a fact checker. You've got to be completely unbiased, down the middle, concerned only with the facts, not with the narrative.
But they're not, Rita, and that's the whole problem. We saw it during the Voice referendum. Russell Skelton is the head of these fact-checking units. Now, he was retweeting pro-Linda Burney tweets. He was pro-Voice. You could just see through his social media. They always fact-check the right. They virtually don't touch the left. And these are partisan fact-checkers. Sky News has exposed on numerous occasions these fact-checkers in the RMIT division are total activists. And a lot of them have shut down their social media because they were caught red-handed spruiking their political views. So this is not objective fact-checking.
No.
This is a partisan outfit.
Completely partisan, and not just partisan being a little left-leaning. Often when you look at some of the individuals involved in this group, they're very much on the far left spectrum of the political environment. Rapper and mogul Sean Diddy Combs had his homes in New York, Los Angeles and Miami raided by Homeland Security agents today. This is allegedly as part of a ongoing sex trafficking investigation. You can see there footage of men being dragged out in handcuffs. It's not Diddy that he wasn't home for any of these raids, but obviously he had people there who've been arrested as part of this investigation. This is enormous, Sophie, because he's not just a massive star in his own right. He owns labels. He is a very powerful figure in the music industry.
Oh, absolutely, Rita. And let's just make sure it's clear yet. We don't know if these allegations are true, so we need to just reserve our judgment here. But this is incredibly concerning, seeing that footage. Obviously, the media were tipped off because of pretty extraordinary footage there. But he's a big deal. He has a lot at stake here. And the whole world is watching this. You know, this story is going absolutely global all around the world because he's such a massive name. So it'll be really interesting, Rita, to see how it plays out, particularly for the music industry.
Well, that's it. There's been so many rumours swirling around, so many allegations that have been made. Even some high-profile people within the entertainment industry have been pointing the finger at him. So in some way, today's raids aren't an entire surprise, but then they are, given the scale of them, to be launching them consecutively across the country, when really there had been no action taken, it seems, until today.
That's right, Rita. And as I said, that as you explained, they're in different cities across the US. So, again, we'll watch this story unfold, but this is a big name and very interesting story that a lot of the world will be watching incredibly closely.
Yes, I think we're going to hear all sorts of accounts on the record in the coming days. Sophie Ellsworth, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you, Rita.
Former President Donald Trump has had his bond payments slashed by an appeals court in New York. He must now pay $175 million US within the next 10 days, down from the $454 million payment that was demanded after the civil fraud allegations brought by Attorney General Letitia James. Trump said he will abide, but not without issuing a few parting words to Judge Arthur Engoron.
Thank you very much. Judge Engoron has done a terrible disservice to the state of New York. What he's done is terrible. Businesses are fleeing. You see that. We just released a statement on Truth. Businesses are fleeing and crime is flourishing all over the state.
Joining me now is our Washington correspondent, Annalise Nelson. Annalise, they're still coming for him. The Democrats are through the courts, pulling out all stops to defeat Donald Trump before the presidential election.
And look, this is very much how it's playing into Donald Trump's campaign. He's still pulling ahead in all those key swing states ahead of Joe Biden. And polls consistently show that many of his supporters say that these cases are exactly what's driving them to support Donald Trump. He's had a boost in those kind of grass level donations. Every time he goes into court, there's a push put through to anyone who follows his campaign to donate to help him. And, you know, in this instance, we're talking about astronomical amounts of money. About $500 million was the original request for this bond payment. But if he is successful on appeal, with that bond being held, he does actually earn interest on that. So if he does win, he will be in for a little bit of a payday on this money that he gets back. And the other thing coming Trump's way potentially is this floating of Truth Social. He could be making up to $1 billion in the initial public offering when that goes through.
I want to ask you about the border. I know this is an issue that we talk about regularly on this program. It continues to be a mess, that southern border. Have a look at this footage of Texas National Guard being overrun by migrants, mainly military-age men, rioting to get across the border in El Paso last week. The footage naturally went viral, and let's have a look at what the response was. The New York Post reporter Jennifer Taya wrote, "Media now being blocked from the scene where we captured a breach by hundreds of migrants in El Paso yesterday. How do we do our jobs now?" So that's a good question, Annalise, because that footage was shocking to see authorities completely lose control and be overrun.
Absolutely. I don't think we've seen anything like that in the last few years as the border's escalated. Jennifer Tay is very good. If anyone's interested in the border, she's absolutely worth a follow. And it's a very legitimate question. How do they do their job if they're being blocked? And this also goes into this stoush between how this is being handled between the federal authorities and the state level authorities. We know Texas wants this sorted, but they're very much hampered by what the federal government wants. And that's why we've seen the Supreme Court challenge already. And you'll notice, as she clarified in that tweet, that sign was put up by the federal authorities. And that's very much driven by the department, who wants to minimise any kind of interpretation that things aren't going well there. But we're talking about 140,000 gotaways over the border, which authorities are saying are a huge security risk. We don't know who these people are. We don't know where they've gone. And it only takes one bad actor in amongst that bunch to cause some real chaos potentially. And so that's the great fear out of this, is that at some point there's going to be some kind of mass incident connected to someone who's walked over the border.
Talking about the border, the border czar, the happy, clappy Vice President Kamala Harris, has got herself into a little bit of trouble for being a little too happy and clappy this week. She was filmed laughing and clapping along to a protest song without realising the singers were actually protesting her. Watch her slowly stop clapping after an aide tells her what they're actually singing. The protesters were chanting, "We want to know, Kamala, what did you come here for? We want to know, what do you think of the colony? Long live free Palestine and Haiti too." A little bit embarrassing, but she's made worse mistakes, Annalise.
This is the big issue as we're going into this election. Kamala Harris has never done retail politics before. People forget she dropped out in 2020 before she ever really had to press the flesh with anyone in the public. And so this is where she is not in her strength, is being out and about at photo ops like this. And then for that campaign, we didn't really have any once COVID hit. Joe Biden wasn't out there, and so neither was Kamala Harris. This time around, it's not going to be the same. The expectation's going to be there, and the focus is going to be greater as we look at Joe Biden being the oldest president in history again, potentially leaving office at the age of 86. This is going to be a live issue, is whether she's ready to step up. And so this is what people are going to be watching closely as these kind of things play out in this election campaign.
Oh, she is a liability. That they haven't got a better Veep for this race is beyond me, because she's not only inept, she's unpopular. It's okay to be one of those things, but to be both is a massive liability for the Biden re-election
You just need to be more popular than the other guys.
Just a little bit popular, but there is a Gavin Newsom just floating around, and as terrible as he has been in California, he is a much better performer than Kamala is. Annalise Nielsen, thank you so much for your time this evening. And still to come, the brilliant Douglas Murray joins me in the studio for an extra long sit-down interview. You do not want to miss that. Welcome back. Now, my next guest needs no introduction, but he shall get one. He is among the most principled and courageous writers and thinkers in the world today, with a moral clarity and command of language that is unmatched, as this Al Jazeera journalist found out last week.
It is internationally recognised.
No, it's not at all.
I want to move on.
That's your view. Hang on, that's your view, and I have to correct your view.
Our views
I
differ.
have to correct. No, it doesn't. The facts, our views might differ, but the facts are the facts, and I want to pick you up on something you just did.
I'm interviewing you.
I know, but
Yes.
I think you're uninformed.
No.
So let me just. You are uninformed
Oh,
because
really?
first of all,
Yes.
you didn't say that Egypt is blockading Gaza. Secondly, you claim that Israel.
I'm talking about
let me
Israel
finish
here,
the point.
and I want to
well,
move.
It's
I want
very
to move on
convenient
from
for
this.
you to mention Israel
Oh.
because you've clearly got an animus here.
Every time there would be a peace agreement, settlements would pop up, and that's why we are where we are today.
No, it's not.
So let's
No,
try
it's
and
not. No,
move
it's not
on.
at all.
No, let's try and
It's
move on.
not at all why we
Let's
are
try
where we
and-
are. Hang on.
We're
What
not
you
achieving
think-
anything
hang on,
here, so
you
let's
think-
try and move on.
No.
Let's
You
try and
think-
move on.
No, it's very, because you just did it again. You just threw in another false fact. We are not where we are today because of settlements in the West Bank that are disputed. That's not why Hamas broke out of Gaza on the 7th of October and massacred people in their homes.
As
that's
we
not,
know,
that's
Hamas
not
got
because of the West
Israeli
Bank, and
support
you
to
well
take
know
on
it.
Yasser
You well know
Arafat.
that.
Douglas Murray, so good to have you back in the studio. Did you not take pity on that woman? I've got to say, she was smug, certainly uninformed, but wow, the way you humbled her, it was...
Well,
even I felt a little bit sorry for her at the end.
no, I mean, you tend to go into an interview like that. It was in South Africa, in Johannesburg. You tend to go in sort of, with goodwill, assuming that the interviewer is hoping to get something interesting out of you, and that, they do so. And occasionally you go in and you discover, this person is here to slay a dragon. And the whole thing changes. I did discover afterwards something I wish I'd known before, which was when she said that she had lived in the region. I remember thinking there's something strange about that. And then, of course, it turned out she'd worked for Al Jazeera, which means she'd lived in Doha. And even on a very clear day from Doha, you can't see Gaza, but it was a Palin-esque claim by her.
Yeah, in the region. Yeah, that's always
region.
Red flags go off. Now, you have arrived in this country and been met with protests. We're normally a welcoming lot, but you've had the usual far-left suspects very much agitated. They've labelled you right-wing, a racist, a supporter of genocide. Let's have a look at some of the chants we're seeing accusing you of supporting genocide.
Gosh.
Douglas Murray, you can't hide, you're supporting genocide. Douglas Murray, you can't hide, you're supporting genocide.
Douglas Murray, you can't hide, you're supporting genocide. What is your response to that very learned criticism?
First of all, I don't feel like I'm hiding, Rita. I mean, it's amazing. This only happened in Sydney, by the way. I did 2 shows at the Enmore Theatre on Sunday. And these protesters showed up, a small group of malcontents showed up on the afternoon. I'm not sure why they didn't do the evening shift. It's possible they didn't know about it. It's possible they slept in, or actually some of them moved on to the port in Sydney where they promptly got arrested. So it was a great day for them. Somebody actually, it was very, very funny. One of them actually sort of tweeted something like, a very important day standing outside the Enmore shouting at Douglas Murray. I was like, that's not a very good day.
No.
I mean, I think that's a kind of a waste of a day, not least because I could not hear them. It made no difference to me. Thousands of very, very nice, clever, informed, good Sydney residents all paid to come and join me for the day in 2 shows. And they weren't intimidated by these people either. I mean, it's really pathetic. And I never want that to sort of overshadow anything else. You know, I've spoken this past week in Perth, in Adelaide, in Brisbane, and we've had wonderful audiences. And it was the same on Sunday. You know, you always get a few of these people who just scream and shout and think they're going to change the world, but they don't. They don't change my mind. They don't change the audience's mind. In fact, they just annoy audience members. And of course, I mean, this thing about genocide, I mean, it's such a smear and a libel. I mean, there is no genocide in Gaza. I support the efforts of the IDF to get the hostages back. And if these people, by the way, if they, I mean, they're such geniuses, so they know how to spend their weekends in Sydney hollering. If they're such geniuses, they should really come up with an alternative plan for the IDF to get back the children and women and men who are still in Hamas captivity, and do so with a smaller body count than the one the IDF is currently seeing. And I bet these people don't have that. They think they have all the answers, but they don't.
Well, this is what I don't understand. Just for the optics of it, if nothing else, you would think these anti-Israeli protesters, or pro-Palestinian as they call themselves, would carry just a couple of signs that are anti-Hamas.
Right.
Calling on Hamas to release the hostages, calling on Hamas to surrender, calling on
Right.
Hamas to stop using the Palestinian people as human shields.
Right.
But you don't see that. And in
No.
fact, in the UK, when I think it was an Iranian man showing up
Yes.
to a protest holding up an anti-Hamas
Yes.
sign, he was physically attacked by the
Yes.
other protesters.
Week after week. Is a very brave young Iranian man, and he has simply gone to several of the protests in London, holding up a sign saying Hamas are terrorists, which they are. And that's the British government's policy. Hamas are a prescribed terrorist organisation in the UK. So this brave young Iranian man holding up a sign that says British government policy, he is the one that has repeatedly been attacked by the peaceful protesters at the oh-so-peaceful marches, and it has been the police that have moved him on. I think he's an absolute hero. I love seeing brave people like that standing up. It gives enormous hope to people, and I hope more people do it.
And I think it just shows the lies that we've been told about a lot of these protests, because the fact that he can't peacefully stand there and, in fact, be supported by those people speaks volumes.
That's right.
Now, your tour, yes, in Sydney, you've had some troublemakers. I'm sure in Melbourne you will, because it's the... it's the home of troublemakers. But it sold out your tour so quickly. I'm interested to know what the Australian people who are paying to hear you speak, what are they interested in talking about? What's top of mind for them?
I think it's several things. I mean, obviously, you know, people are very interested about the wider world, about the region, about wars I've covered recently, including the Hamas war, the Ukraine war. But in my as far as I've seen it, we use a thing every night called Slido, so people can send in questions and then upvote the questions they really want you to answer, which is a great system.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that, I mean, there are very, very similar concerns to other countries I've been to recently, and also specific ones to do with Australia. I mean, of course, you had the referendum last year, and the referendum and issues related to it seem to be a sort of bubbling under the surface thing in this country, it seems to me, because there is this, and I've said this a couple of times to audiences here, that the vision of Australians that I grew up with and you grew up with has changed slightly in our own lifetime. In fact, you might say changed quite a lot. And I see that kind of happy country, you know, frank-speaking, clear-thinking sort of Australian tradition sort of being subdued, like it's chased out of people. Like people are made to feel guilty for things they haven't done.
Oh, yes.
They're made to feel like they're usurpers and colonizers and all this sort of thing. And it's so destructive, and you can see it, you can feel it, you can hear it. You know, everybody wants to get along, everyone wants to do well in the future, but, you know, there's no way that this country or any other country can if you're mired in the guilt and this sort of dampening down of the majority, you know, the sort of you can't say that, you can't think that. That's why I love referendums, actually. I mean, they're always an opportunity for the general public to kick our political class in the ghoulies, you know.
And like Brexit, when it came to this referendum, the race-based referendum, it was a case where you had the entire elite, really, the celebrities, the activists, the corporates, all of them sporting clubs, all on the side of the yes vote, which obviously the Australian government was backing. And then the no vote wins in every single state.
Yes.
And that tells you plenty, even in left-leaning states like here in Victoria. But I think we do have this unique problem in Australia, and I think it's particularly bad here, more so than the US and the UK, where there is this self-loathing. We can't even celebrate our national day, Australia Day, without being accused of supporting genocide and white supremacy, and it's an invasion and it's a harmful day. You don't even have that in the UK or the US, where UK, they still revere their traditions. US, there's a great deal of patriotism across much of the country. But I just wonder what the impact is on a country that seems determined to hate itself.
Yeah, I mean, the long-term impact, we don't yet know. I mean, we can guess. We don't yet know because, as far as I know, no civilization has tried this before. Yeah. You know, most people sort of want to exist, want to thrive, you know, and most people are proud of what has gone well in their country. You know, every country's had things that they're not proud of.
Of course.
But the question isn't that, and isn't lingering all the time on that. The question is, what have we done well? You know, you saw this in Don Lemon's interview with Elon Musk last week, where Elon Musk just said, you know, if we keep talking about the slave trade in America, we're never going to get past it. And Don Lemon seems sort of thrown by that, as he is by any original thought. But he seemed genuinely thrown by that it's absolutely true. The question isn't whether or not you've acknowledged any mistakes in your past. The point is, are we able to get past them? And are we able to say anything good about ourselves? And if in Australia, the whole narrative is just, as you say, genocide yesterday, genocide today, genocide tomorrow, of course people aren't going to be brought up to be proud of their country. And of course they aren't going to see the good things. I would just beg the people who fall into that narrative, which includes a lot of young people who go along with the herd. A lot of young people don't, but a lot of young people do go along with that herd. I would beg them just to go somewhere else in the world, just for a week, and see the comparative rights that you have in any other country in this region and the rights you have here, the traditions in any other region, the traditions you have here, what's gone well in other parts of the region and what's gone well here. And, you know, to revive something I've said to you before in other contexts, there's a reason that the boats come to Australia and they do not leave from Australia to other places. There is a reason. And if the people who do this, there's nothing good about Australia, we're all genocidists and murderers and so on, which is absolutely preposterous. And nobody's guilty of things they didn't do. But if those people could just reflect for a moment, you know, why is it that if this country is as bad as these people and the corporations and all these pop stars and so on, if it's as bad as they say, why are people not fleeing Melbourne today? Why is this city booming? Why are people not fleeing here for the sanctuary of communist China? There must be something we've done well. There must be something you've done well in Australia. I think there's a lot you've done well.
The only place Victorians are fleeing is Queensland, much further than Dan. But this notion of we're on stolen land, that seems to be
preposterous.
A grievance, and you know, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. You've flown around the country. I'm sure you've heard, as soon as a plane lands, this acknowledgement of country. Yes. There's almost this notion that we are on interlopers on someone else's land, and we're not as entitled to feel that it's as much ours as it is theirs.
Which means you have a population where the majority feels less than. Now, I mean, if you had a minority population, say 3% of the population, that was repeatedly made to feel less than the rest, I think we would say, look, that's ridiculous. That 3% of the population should be encouraged, should be made to feel welcome, should be made to feel at home. We don't hold them back, anything else. It would be madness to hold back 3% of your population. When you're dealing with the majority of your population being made to feel less than, I mean, as I say, that's an experiment no one has really tried before.
No.
People have tried to oppress minorities, but trying to oppress and beleaguer and demoralise the majority in a country, I mean, that's lunacy.
It is, and that's what really the referendum was about.
Yeah.
It wasn't about equal rights. It was about giving a particular minority additional rights.
Yeah.
And that's where people said no.
Yeah, we're either equal or we're not.
That's it.
You know?
Absolutely. Now, you've been warning us about some of these issues for years now in your books, what's happening in the West, the threats against Western civilization. What do you see right now in 2024 as the biggest threat facing the West?
I think it's that one. I think it's within, Rita. I really do. I think it's the threat within of us delegitimizing ourselves. It's the threat in America of people being, you know, I've said this a bit to audiences this week. If you look at the polls that came out when Ukraine was invaded in America, asking Americans whether or not they would fight for their country if it was invaded, only just a majority of Americans said they would. A minority of Democrats, a slight majority of Republicans. And it was the same recently in the UK when the defense minister said, look, if Russia does roll into the Baltics, we might have to have conscription. A minority of young Brits said they would be willing to fight for their country. But here's the thing. I understand that. I abhor it. I'm very, very sorry that it's the case. But I understand it, because if you've been told your country was rotten from the start, as with Australia, entirely based on theft and colonialism and repression and racism and much more, as if the rest of the world was based on just kumbaya. If you believe that, why the hell would you lay down your life for it? If you were told from kindergarten onwards that you were on stolen land, that you were a usurper, that you'd enslave people when you'd done nothing other than, you know, try to build some bricks or something, you know, why would you risk your life or lay down your life for a country you were told was rotten? And the answer is, it would be madness to do so. We are telling ourselves a totally false version of our history, and at the very least an unfair version of our history. And it's the same in Australia, it's the same in Britain, same in America. And, you know, there's a very odd thing that happens when that occurs, which is that every opportunistic thing comes in. You know, people come in and they claim you've done things that you've never heard of, and you say, well, probably that as well, because I'm guilty of everything else.
Exactly.
You know, and before you know it, you're just accepting versions of yourself that are not just false but are destructive. And I think that's the biggest one. But the good news is, that's one we can solve. That's one we can solve.
How do we solve it? Is it through the education system, the curriculum? How do we actually address this teaching that we've had really now for decades, that we are inherently oppressors and evil, and the success of the West is built on colonisation and the backs of oppressed people?
Well, I mean, the first thing is, no change like this can be done by government edict. You know, we can't wait for the Minister of Culture to announce a new inquiry, followed by a consultative process and then an interim report. That is not going to solve any of this. I believe it's in all of our hands. It's in the hands of everybody who voted in the referendum and the ones who didn't. It's in the hands of everybody who wishes to have a better life here in Australia, here in the West. It's in our hands to say no when this narrative is pushed on us, in whatever way you can. I've spoken this week to people from a bewildering variety of professions who've come to my events, and you know, they very often have a story from the workplace of, you know, this was being said, I didn't know what to do, or I did know what to do, and I did say something. I would say if everybody just took one step forward, that would solve an enormous amount of things. Just one step forward to say no, not to be pushed around. You know, I never saw Australians as a people, any more than I did my fellow Brits. I never saw us as people who could be easily pushed around. Actually, quite the opposite. We were not easily pushed around, and we shouldn't be.
But we are now, and we saw that during the COVID era here in Australia in particular, but the UK was just as bad. I know Australia gets a lot of coverage, particularly Melbourne, for those 6 lockdowns, but people were willing to submit to the most illogical, draconian measures in the name of perceived safety, even when really, you didn't need to have a medical degree to realise wearing a mask outdoors by myself, where is the science behind that? But people just blindly followed it. and attack those who challenged some of these edicts?
Yeah, well, you know, there are several ways you can go after that. One is to decide, OK, everything in the rest of our lives should be, you know, treated in that sort of way. We should be super cautious people, and that the lesson of COVID is to be even more cautious and triple mask whenever you go for a run on the beach, obviously. But the other way is to say, actually, to learn a different lesson from that and say, you know, maybe we shouldn't be so easily pushed around. Maybe, you know, the fact we were then, maybe it means we shouldn't be in the future. And maybe we should find some of our courage again. And that's what I think. I don't believe people want to live as sort of subjugated, scolded people. And if you want to get anywhere in your life as an individual or as a society, you've got to encourage not this endless repression and this endless scolding. You've got to encourage heroism. You've got to encourage entrepreneurialism. You've got to encourage daring. You know, the remarkable people that this country has produced were remarkable not because they were quiescent and shy and didn't want to make any noise in the world. They were remarkable because they wanted to get out there.
Yes.
That's what made this country. That's what made Britain. That's what made America. And that's what will make us tomorrow. And we should look to that, because all of our competitors and rivals on the world stage, you know, they have their young being educated very hard, indeed working many times as hard as some kids do here, to get the lifestyle that we're used to and thinks our God-given right. And it isn't. It's only our God-given right if we fight for it.
Absolutely. But we have seen in other parts of the world, Europe, the rise of the right or the far right, if you believe the media. We've seen that from Italy to the Netherlands, South America, Central America, El Salvador and Argentina. What do you think is behind that? Is just that politics going backwards and forwards, or is that a movement that you think there's something behind that?
I'm always wary about drawing out too big an extrapolation of the sort of left-right global shifts, because, for instance, I mean, we've got elections this year, I'm sure you've noticed, in America and in Britain. You've heard tell of that. Yes. And also in Britain. And in Britain, it shows very likely that we'll have a left-wing Labour government in Britain by the end of this year. And
arguably, you've had one for some years.
Well, I think we've had one for 14 years, but yeah, that's. But you know, so the interesting thing is that Britain might be heading to the left. Which I think will be a disaster for Britain on the economy and much else, but the Conservatives deserve a drubbing. And in America, you know, who knows? Maybe it's Joe Biden, maybe it's Donald Trump. If it's Joe Biden again, then yes. I mean, a lot of countries have been shifting to the right, and quite a long way to the right in some cases. But if you know, countries like Britain and America shift to the left, you can't say that it's a pattern that is everywhere. Absolutely. I would like to think that it's possible for voters, though, to show how they actually feel. There's a strong feeling in a lot of countries of just disengagement. You know, voters saying, I don't have anyone to vote for. It's all a waste of time. I'd like to think that, whenever people say this party is beyond the pale, that party is beyond the pale, I say, look, the democratic process includes people you don't like. But the most important thing is, do people feel they have a stake in it? And that includes the stake, as I say, to kick hard at the people who've been telling you what you should do, what you should think, and who you should be.
Absolutely. Now, there has been this political realignment we've seen in the UK, US, in Australia as well, where you've got the affluent leaning increasingly left, whilst the working class, middle class are switching to the conservative side. It explains a lot of the support that Trump receives. Why do you think that is? Why do you think there's been almost this quite stark political realignment? Yeah,
this is what I think it's partly attributable to what Rob Henderson, the American writer, calls the luxury beliefs class. Luxury. You know, the people you're talking about, the sort of, you know, the elites in a lot of the media. I mean, there's lots of elites always, and there's no bad thing. But I mean, the specific thing of having an elite of anti-elitists, having an elite that believes that they know best and the public are the problem, you know, to use the old joke of Brecht, you know, the public are the problem. We need to find a new public. But the people, like the ones we were talking about earlier, and the corporations and the big media and entertainment stars who came out for the losing side on the referendum. A lot of those people are just signalling something. They're just saying, I'm on the right side. And of course, I think what a lot of people in the electorate have cottoned on to is that a lot of these people who lecture us and berate us from the stage of the Oscars to Parliament here, a lot of them are saying things that they think make them look good, but are actually bad for the country. Like, my friend Lionel Shriver pointed this out some time ago about the thing of, self-hating. And she said to me, Douglas, these people you're talking about who are pushing self-hatred on us, they don't hate themselves at all. They love themselves. They love themselves. And making other people feel self-hatred and pretending they do, pretending they're so guilt-ridden, millions of ribbons down each side of their jackets, those people feel fantastic about themselves. And making us feel guilty is just part of that.
Still to come, part 2 of our interview with Douglas Murray, discussing the big issues of the day, from the Biden administration turning its back on Israel to Russian authorities torturing terror suspects. Welcome back. Now, to current events, we saw that horrific Islamist attack in Russia, saw 137 people gunned down, including 3 children. Another 182 people were injured. The death toll there was horrific. Since then, we've seen the capture of the 4 suspects and the torture they've been subjected to by Russian forces, with one having an ear cut off and fed to him, another having electric shocks given to his genital area. I mean, the brutality is horrific as well. And Douglas, I know this is going to be a unpopular opinion, but perhaps I wouldn't be saying this if it was my family member who'd been murdered, but this disturbs me greatly, and the reaction to it disturbs me greatly. There seems to be really not much condemnation of this torture. Is torture ever justified?
No, I don't think it is. But I think that what you see is just the operation tendencies of the FSB. This is how the Russians operate. But again, it's one of the things that people should remember when they're forever castigating the West. Everyone's always, all these people who go around saying, war crimes about the Israelis, genocide, war crimes in America, torture, and all this sort of thing. This is a country, Russia, which actually does do that and actually does believe in it.
And proudly, on camera.
Exactly.
There's video footage of all this.
Exactly. And they're not going to bow to... I mean, maybe a mob can get together, a protest group later in Melbourne about this. But I doubt it will, because the Russians don't listen. They don't listen at all.
What about the reaction? Because from otherwise decent people, they seem to have no issue with this. And I know we're talking about monsters. I know we're talking about men who gunned down over 100 people, including 3 children, but the justification for torture, that worries me. That worries me about where we are.
Well, I think that these terrorists are obviously, the lowest of the low lives. So, to do that, to go into a shopping centre and a theatre and start gunning people down, we've seen it elsewhere. We've seen it in London. We've seen it in Paris. We've seen it sadly around the world. And it's inevitable that there is rage in people's hearts about this. And there's even more rage in the West because our governments tell us we shouldn't be allowed to feel rage.
No, we can't even condemn it. We had the Manchester bombing and there was almost an immediate drive against Islamophobia.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always the same, the same. But the thing is, there is... When somebody does something, when a group of people do something like ISIS appeared to have done in Moscow, of course, there's a sort of feeling of vengefulness and revenge. Now, in the West, we would hope that we would prosecute that revenge as carefully as possible, and that it would be legal, that it would go through the law courts if the people are captured alive. But in other theatres, they'd be killed in operation and during the attack and else, other things. It's just that, that is an inevitable tendency to want to have revenge after that. But, the fact that in Russia that revenge extends to torture, as I say, is not at all a surprise in Russia. But I think you can want there to be no pity for the terrorists without encouraging them to be mutilated by the Russian troops. I mean, it's just...
Now, before you go, I've got to ask you about the US. We're seeing the political prosecution of Donald Trump. They've been trying to take his assets. Today, there's been a development there with the bond being reduced dramatically, and he's saying that he'll be posting that new amount. I think it's 175 million US. How do you see this effort to get Trump before he can be re-elected? It seems to be a determined effort from the Democrats and their lawmakers to politicise the justice system. And it really has a dangerous effect. You look at some of the polling now, trust in the US justice system is at record lows. People do not trust the system.
Well, it's a very interesting thing that because, of course, a lot of Americans didn't trust the justice system already. I mean, the conviction rates in the US courts, for anyone who's been through them, are astronomically high.
Almost Beijing-like, but not quite.
Yeah, I mean, it's teetering on 99%, you know, and so a lot of Americans who've had experience of that already distrusted it. Then you've had the sort of super politicization of things like the Supreme Court, and then the Trump persecution. I do think it's a kind of persecution. I have plenty of criticisms of Donald Trump, but if you wanted to make sure he wasn't elected again, then run a really good candidate against him and highlight the things that he did in his term of office that you disagree with. Most people, I think, in America can see that this is a form of endless persecution against Trump. It certainly looks like that. This way of sort of trying to ruin him financially just looks like the final sort of, you know, the final turn of that dial. And I think a lot of people will see it as being cruel and unusual. I think it's only helping Trump, though. You know, I mean, as you say, I'm not sure that outside America people are quite prepared for this. You know, the polls that you've seen and I've seen that say that he's likely to win against Biden later this year. I mean, personally, you know, I have just about enough existential energy to, you know, cover various wars and things. I'm not sure if I have the existential energy this time, Rita, to cover Trump-Biden Part 2. We last met in America, in New York, in Trump-Biden round 1. I don't know. I mean, those guys might be there for round 2. You might be there for round 2. I think I might be just propping up the bar, exhausted by that. I'm not sure. This is going to be brutal, Rita.
Oh, it is absolutely going to be brutal. But we've seen the Biden administration reverse course on Israel. And a lot of the conjecture there is, well, it's because they're trying to hold on to those swing seats, Michigan, Minnesota, where there's large Muslim populations who are very upset with the Democrats for standing with Israel. How do you see that? How is the Biden administration going to balance that supporting their ally, but also making sure they don't lose those crucial swing seats?
There's a very interesting thing that's gone on in the last few days, which people haven't noted, which is whilst the rhetoric has ramped up against Israel from the Biden administration, there's been a new package of arms for Israel from the administration. Now, that's very interesting. I'm very pleased that that's the case because I think Israel should be allowed to win its war against Hamas and destroy Hamas. But it's very interesting that they're doing this two-hander, effectively. The sort of public statements and then what they're actually doing. I mean, you know, David Cameron, Lord Cameron to us, he's just said that, you know, if Israel doesn't do what Lord Cameron wants, then he might stop arms shipments to Israel from Britain. Britain doesn't make a significant amount of arms anyway, so I mean, it's a sort of rather grandstanding thing to do. But it is interesting, that difference between the rhetoric and the reality from Biden. I would just say, you know, the Biden administration has been a pretty good friend to Israel during this, but they are worried, it seems, about their polling in Minnesota and so on. I understand it. I would just say that, you know, I mean, Rita, if Australia was at war, and or no, let's put it the other way around. Let's say if America was at war, and it wasn't going down all that well among some people in Australia, I would not expect the Australian Prime Minister to pick up the phone to the President and say, now, look, you've got to halt your war because some of our voters in Melbourne are displeased with it.
Yeah, exactly.
You wouldn't expect that from an ally. I mean, the job of an ally is to be supportive to you in your hour of need. And God knows it's an hour of need in Israel. And I would hope that America would stand by Israel as it finishes its war against the terrorists, as I would expect people to stand by this country if this country suffered a similar outrage to that which Israel suffered on the 7th.
Douglas Murray, always a pleasure. Thank you for your time this evening.
Terrific to see you in person.
That's it from me tonight. I'll see you at 11 tomorrow night. Don't go anywhere. News Night is up next. Good night.